Hey, what's up, y'all? And of course, welcome back to another Alternative Factuals video. So this week's video is going to be a very cool and kind of interesting one, since, you know, it's going to be about my homeboy, Miles Morales. And before I dive into anything, I'm just going to dive kind of straight into it after I do this whole intro thing. Please be sure to like, share, and of course subscribe. Leave your comments down below. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me know what you're feeling. And without further and or possible ado, let's kind of just jump into today's video. So this story is actually pretty cool. It's called Miles Morales, The End. And the title obviously is pretty self-explanatory, but I want to kind of, you know, talk about, well, not necessarily talk about the story, kind of go over this story because I think it's really cool, and it just shows how Miles Morales himself, him being who he is, and the reason why I feel like, you know, despite all the mayhem he might have caused when he first, you know, arrived on the scene as being the new Spider-Man, I think this is why he deserves the title of being Spider-Man. I always say he means well, and even though some people did give, you know, slack about it, but this story kind of takes place essentially in Brooklyn. Humanity is making its last stand against these creatures, and Miles Morales is basically the mayor of Brooklyn as being the last and final stronghold fighting against these creatures, which later on we'll find out what they're called in a little bit. So let's kind of just jump into it. So this story immediately picks up with this family. Now this family pretty much only consists of, you know, a young man and his daughter who presumably have been out there for a while, and this is decades in the future, before any pretty much after everything we technically know. We have to assume naturally that the timeline kind of went the same up until 10 years ago. So, but that's a whole nother conversation for another day. But you see a father and his daughter, they're out there. He's pretty much dehydrated running while he gave his last little bit of water to his daughter, obviously to keep her alive. And they're pretty much on the run from these creatures. These creatures, even on the art style, look a little funky. They look actually kind of, you know, kind of fun and whimsical a little bit, but you can tell they're very aggressive. But basically they're running, and then at some point they run into someone who is just such a sight for sore eyes. And absolutely, that is Miles Morales, Spider-Man. Now, remember, this is 10 years, or it says 10 years from now, but ultimately, you see that he himself is an older man. You can see he has a little bit of a stomach, a little bit of a gut. You know, obviously, as you get older, your body does not metabolize like carbs and proteins and calories the same way, but nonetheless, he still has his spider abilities, and he's still pretty much moving really well for someone his age. Now he comes in, he uses his abilities, he uses his little spider shock to kind of destroy these creatures, and then he pretty much saves the daughter and he pretty much saves the father. Now what we find out also going forward is that this is, well, Miles Morales is not only Spider-Man, but the mayor of, like I said previously, Brooklyn. And he uses bioelectricity to kind of, you know, destroy these creatures nonetheless, and then he gives them some form of dehydration drink to kind of help super nutrient or give them super nutrients, so that way they can kind of make the trip back to Brooklyn, since they had crossed, I believe it looks like the Brooklyn Bridge, but I'm assuming so, since, you know, the trip or the walk across the bridge wasn't very much long at all. So he brings them into Brooklyn, and he ultimately just says, welcome to Brooklyn. And compared to what the Brooklyn Bridge looks like, compared to what the rest of the world look like, Brooklyn looks amazing. You know, the trees are green, there's places to eat, and he's just introducing them to everybody. And then, like, they're like, what's this smell? It smells like food. People in Brooklyn are happy. And what we know is that Miles Morales has established this kind of task force where the entirety of Brooklyn is just protected from these creatures. They cannot get in. No matter what they do, they can't seem to break into, you know, this area of New York which Miles Morales has kind of established. But nonetheless, he introduces her to the deputy mayor, which her name is Maxine Lee. They say what's up, and they pretty much go on their way. Now she brings to her, his attention that they need to have a conversation about something that's really important to the city, and that's regarding the supply lines. Now she brings to his attention that, hey, our supplies are actually being choked out by another group of people who have ulterior motives, which we will find out later that is going to be run by some Captain America knockoff who has his own ideologies about how Brooklyn should be ran. And he's just basically trying to get into Brooklyn because, one, they have a great ecosystem and kind of a great kind of environment going on, and he just wants to take it over, and he's trying to take out the mayor simply because, hey, I want Brooklyn, you don't deserve it, I deserve deserve it. Typical, Caucasian, European, whatever you want to call it. But ultimately they do head out, get to the supply lines, and you see that he starts battling with this guy who's called Captain Last. Captain Last is wearing, it looks like remnants of Captain America's outfit, his shield, all that stuff. But they start battling Captain Last and Miles Morales, and then you see Captain Last is very surprised on how fast and powerful the mayor is. But he said, hey, I can go toe-to-toe with you anytime. But he said, I'm not too much of an issue for someone like you, despite the fact that you may have this sort of abilities. And then somehow it seems like these people have found this serum that was from a lab, so they seem to be slightly augmented, but ultimately he does use his electric abilities and uses it on Captain Last, and he basically says you talk too much, which he does. He's been chatting this entire few pages. So he gets him down on his knees and then he sends them running. And then that's pretty much what he needed to do in order to kind of get those supplies to pass through, since Captain Last was the one person who was kind of holding things back for a few of the supplies, and they have the resources that they need to kind of bring back into Brooklyn. But one thing we see about Miles Morales as he got older is that he still didn't lose his sense of, morality, and he still didn't lose his sense of, caring for people, because some of the stuff that's actually in this transport is like toys for kids. And even though if you're in an apocalyptic situation, I know for myself included, having toys for little kids is not a priority, because one, kids get very attached to toys and they do stupid things to retrieve those toys, mostly white kids. But two, what makes this story very, very interesting is that despite everything, he has an up and running city that's functioning, fighting against these creatures, fighting against another group of people who are just simply trying to take over Brooklyn for the sake of doing it. He does it anyway. He got toys anyway, and he did it for the kids, knowing that, hey, eventually these kids will want these toys because, hey, they deserve it. Life is hard enough already right now. So 1 week passes and, everything is pretty much just fine and dandy. He's just enjoying himself in the city, looking at these kids, playing with these toys and these drones and all that stuff. So it's mostly just him admiring his work. So we basically fast forward to Maxine, who obviously, like I said before, is his niece, and she's going over some of the reports for the city, basically saying that some of the soil power conduits are going to be changed or have to be changed by next, but then somehow they get interrupted. Now, what we know from this already is that even though the city is up and running, it has a full-fledged shield surrounding it. What we do know is that, despite everything that's going on today, even though it seems like he may be running this perfect city, which in theory he is, it's just like resources, no matter what, is relatively low. So they're always on a hunt to figure out more power conduits, more things to keep the city up and running. And so he just keeps doing what he does. Now, what we see is Captain Last makes a return, but it seems like this time, for some very odd reason, well, I can tell you already that this panel is very reminiscent of those people who were basically invading the Capitol way back then, a few months ago in real life. So he's a reflection of it. He feels like he deserves this Brooklyn territory, even though he has no qualifications. But that's besides the point. All of them are wearing American flags and kind of waving around their ideologies on what they believe they should have, whatever the case may be. But Captain Last has augmented himself to the point that he looks like this little purple monster with an orange beard. And then I'm pretty sure we already know what's going to happen going forward when it comes to this fight. This dude becomes so powerful, he breaks through the shield, because these group of people are not native to Brooklyn. They exist outside of Brooklyn. That's where their group is. That's where all the other creatures are. He basically merges with this creature, those creatures that were on the outside. He merged with the germs, which is the creatures that are basically existing and cause this apocalyptic situation. With his augmentation already he had from some serum that he found in a lab, plus the germs, he merged with it and was able to break through this protective layer that was surrounding Brooklyn. And then he does so, breaks it, and then he basically sends his men charging through, and they just go firing back and forth. They have the guns shooting back and forth, and then he's going super duper hard to take out Miles Morales. And even though Miles Morales still has, in terms of his spider abilities, his ability to shock people, his strength, his speed, he's still an older man. So even though he's stronger than like me and you, even if I'm like in my prime, for example, the sad part is, he may be stronger than me and you, but compared to what he could have been in his prime, he is weaker. And in this situation, he is going to get demolished. And they're just going back and forth, and Miles Morales is giving it every single thing he has. And I mean everything, because his whole purpose is to make sure that this city stays safe. So he is going back and forth with Captain Last as much as he possibly can. And nonetheless, you see that, yeah, he gets everything he needs. He gets the upper hand on some occasions, but he's still getting hit. But what he does is muster up as much of his strength as he can, and then at the very last minute, he does manage to completely beat him. But unfortunately, doing so killed him. If you enjoyed the story, or if you enjoyed the breakdown of the story, the conversation of the story, please be sure to like, share, and of course subscribe. Leave your comments down below, and I hope to see you later on. Peace out.